Welcome to this explainer. If you take a second to just look around you right now, there is a massive, almost chaotic whirlwind of economic activity happening every single minute. People are producing goods, offering services, buying, selling, and moving things from one corner of the country to another. But how do we actually make sense of this giant web? Well, today, we're decoding the Indian economy, which is a fascinating story full of incredible growth and some pretty striking paradoxes.
To decode this massive puzzle, we're going to map things out by looking at 6 main pieces: the 3 sectors, counting goods and GDP, the employment paradox, solving disguised unemployment, organized versus unorganized labor, and finally, public and private ownership. All right, part 1, the 3 sectors. These are the fundamental building blocks of our daily lives. Let's dive in by stripping the economy down to its most visible layer. So pretty much all economic activities fall into 3 major buckets. First up is the primary sector. This is the absolute base layer where we're directly exploiting natural resources. Think of a farmer growing cotton, a dairy farmer, or miners pulling ore out of the ground. Next, we step up to the secondary sector. This is the manufacturing phase. It's taking that raw natural cotton and spinning it into yarn, or baking earth into bricks for houses. And finally, we have the tertiary sector. Now, these activities don't actually produce physical goods themselves. Instead, they act as the crucial support system for the other 2. We're talking about the trucks moving the cotton, the banks financing the brick factories, and the IT networks keeping everything connected. Moving right along to Section 2, counting goods and GDP. With millions of different activities going on, how do we possibly measure how big an entire country's economy actually is? The trick economists use is that they absolutely don't count everything. Imagine a farmer sells wheat for 20 rubles. Then a mill turns that wheat into flour and sells it for 25. Finally, a company takes that flour, bakes it into a packet of biscuits, and sells it to you for 80 rupees. Economists only count that final good, the 80 rupee biscuits that actually reach you. If they counted the wheat, then the flour, and then the biscuits, they'd literally be counting the exact same product 3 times. Suddenly, a basic pack of biscuits looks like a massive luxury investment on paper. So by only adding up the value of all final goods and services across all 3 sectors, we arrive at our total production. That is our GDP. Which brings us to Section 3, the employment paradox. This is the real twist in our economic tale, where the story gets a bit complicated. Things get really interesting when we look at India's growth over a 40-year span. Between 1977 and 2017, there is just this massive explosion in the tertiary sector. Driven by a huge surge in basic services, IT, banking, and trade, the service sector completely took over. It became the absolute largest producing sector in India, leaving agriculture and manufacturing totally in the dust in terms of pure revenue. But here's the paradox. When we switch gears and look at where people are actually working today, it's a totally different reality. Even though the service sector is raking in the lion's share of the money, the primary sector, meaning mostly agriculture, still employs more than half of the country's workforce. It's crazy. Over half the workers are producing only about 1/6 of the total economic value. Why? Well, simply put, the industrial and service sectors just haven't created nearly enough jobs to absorb the population. And that introduces the real villain of our story: disguised unemployment. Imagine a small farmer named Lakshmi. She has this tiny plot of rain-dependent land, and her entire family of 5 works on it all year round. Why? Because they literally have nowhere else to go. They all look like they're working, but their labor effort is totally divided. In reality, you only need 2 people to farm that plot. The other 3 are essentially disguised as employed, but they're working way below their actual potential. If those 3 left to go work in a factory, the farm's production wouldn't drop a single bit, but the family's overall income would absolutely skyrocket. There are lakhs of farmers just like Lakshmi across India. And honestly, it happens in cities too. Think of street painters or cart pushers who are out there all day but earn barely anything. So if agriculture isn't generating the most money, but it's trapping way too many workers, how do we actually solve this hidden crisis? That brings us to Section 4, solving disguised unemployment. It's all about putting that wasted potential to work. The main goal here is pulling surplus labor out of crowded fields and putting them into highly productive roles. This requires some serious, strategic investment. For example, if the government builds dams and canals, farms instantly become more productive, which creates more localized work. If local banks step in with cheap credit, farmers can finally buy proper seeds and water pumps without getting crushed by local moneylenders. But we also have to build outside the farm, right? Setting up semi-rural industries like doll mills or cold storage gives farmers a place to process and sell their crops while creating brand new jobs from scratch. Plus, investing in social infrastructure is basically a job creation goldmine. Niti Aayog estimates that just improving the education sector alone could create 20 lakh jobs for teachers, support staff, and builders. Now, obviously, those are long-term plans. For immediate, short-term relief, the government had to step in by essentially guaranteeing a right to work. Under laws like MGNREGA back in 2005 and later Viksit Bharat Gram in 2025, the government guarantees 100 days of wage employment in a year to rural households that need it. It is a critical lifeline while the rest of the economy catches up.
But that brings us to a kinda uncomfortable pivot. Generating jobs is obviously step one, but is simply having a job enough if the actual working conditions are terrible?
Let's look at Section 5, Organized versus Unorganized Labor. To really grasp this divide, it helps to look at a tale of two neighbors. Imagine two people living side by side. On one side, we have Kanta. She works in the organized sector. That means her workplace is formally registered with the government. She has fixed working hours, she gets paid leave, she gets medical benefits, and she even contributes to a provident fund for retirement. Now look at her neighbor, Kamal. Kamal works at a local grocery shop, meaning he operates in the unorganized sector. The guy works a grueling 12-hour day. If he gets sick and has to stay home, he doesn't get paid. 0 paid leave. He has no formal appointment letter, absolutely no job security, and he could be fired tomorrow on a total whim. Think about your own job for a second. Which of those realities looks closer to yours?
Kanta's life is stable and secure. But Kamal's situation? That is the harsh reality for the vast majority of India. The unorganized sector isn't just some tiny fringe of the economy. Nearly 80% of rural households are small and marginal farmers operating entirely in the unorganized sector. Add to that the millions of urban street vendors, headload workers, and casual construction laborers. These workers are incredibly vulnerable to exploitation, wildly irregular income, and just awful working conditions. It highlights exactly why aggressive government support and legal protections are absolutely crucial here.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 6, Public and Private Ownership. Essentially, who holds the reins of the economy? This is our final lens, categorizing the economy by who actually owns the assets and who is responsible for delivering services. You basically have the private sector and the public sector. In the private sector, companies like Tata Iron and Steel or Reliance Industries own the assets. Their main motive is, naturally, to make a profit. If you want their services, you have to pay for them. On the flip side, the public sector is owned by the government. Think of the Indian Railways or the vast postal network. The public sector's primary motive isn't just squeezing out a profit. It's about service. It's about providing the heavy infrastructure that society actually needs to function smoothly. The whole idea is beautifully captured in this thought. There are several things needed by the society as a whole, but which the private sector will not provide at a reasonable cost. Think about it for a second. The private sector isn't going to easily fund a massive, multi-billion-dollar national highway or try to independently provide affordable elementary education to millions of impoverished kids. They aren't going to build the infrastructure to supply safe drinking water to remote, ignored regions. There's no fast profit in that. And that is exactly why the government has to step in, take on that heavy spending, and make sure human development actually reaches everyone. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about your own daily routine. From the food sitting on your table, to the smartphone in your hand, right down to the roads you commute on, every single product and service you touch fits somewhere into this massive economic puzzle. So I'll leave you with this. Which sectors are you heavily relying on today? And perhaps more importantly, who is looking out for the unorganized workers out there who are quite literally making your day possible? Think about that and keep exploring.